They always come running when you cry. Men, that is. I learned that when I was 12. A classmate had yanked a fistful of my hair during recess. I didn't fight back. I didn't even flinch. I just crumpled to the ground, holding my head like it was split open. He panicked, shouted for help, and when the teacher came running, he was the one sent home early, eyes red and jaw tight. I didn't cry because it hurt. I cried because I could. Men never change, no matter how many years you add or how much power you give them. They see tears, they hear a trembling voice, and something clicks. A primal urge to soothe, protect, and control all at once. I use it well. Take tonight. The dim glow of the parking garage's lights flickers overhead, the cold air slipping through cracks in the concrete. My car, a battered silver sedan I bought for cash, sits idle near the exit, its hazard lights flashing. One heel is in my hand, its strap torn, while the other dangles on my foot like a drunk clinging to a railing. I sit on the curb, arms wrapped around myself, waiting. It doesn't take long. "Ma'am?" His voice echoes off the concrete, hesitant but firm. "You okay over there?" I glance up and blink, letting the mascara smudge just a little under my eyes. Bradley, the parking attendant, is standing a few feet away, his hands shoved into the pockets of a black jacket with a frayed zipper. I'd been watching him for weeks, 42, divorced, with a daughter he hadn't seen in 2 years. He's the kind of man who carries guilt like it's a badge of honor, but only for the things he thinks are safe to admit. "I'm sorry," I mumble, my voice quivering. "My car, I think the battery's dead, and my phone, I can't." I let the words hang, unfinished, my lip trembling as I lower my gaze. His posture softens just like I knew it would. They always soften. "Hey, it's okay," he says, taking a cautious step closer. "I've got a jump kit in the booth. You're not hurt or anything, are you?" I shake my head, biting my lip as if I'm holding back tears. He moves closer, crouching slightly so we're almost at eye level. His hairline is receding, and there's a thin scar on his jaw. "I'm Bradley," he says, offering a hand. "Ellie," I whisper, letting him help me to my feet. The garage smells like oil and damp concrete, the kind of sterile rot you can only find in cities. The air feels heavier in here, as if it's holding its breath, waiting for something. Bradley fiddles with the jumper cables, muttering under his breath about the garage's poor maintenance. I stay a few feet away, watching him through lowered lashes, like I'm too afraid to get closer. "You're lucky I was still here," he says, glancing at me. "I'm usually out by this time." "What are you doing out so late anyway?" "I had dinner with some friends downtown," I lie. "But I left my wallet at the restaurant, and then my phone died and—" I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. "It's just one of those nights, I guess." He chuckles, shaking his head as if he's heard it all before. "Yeah, sounds like it. Don't worry, though. We'll get you sorted out." I smile, small and grateful, as if his presence alone is enough to make me feel safe. "All done." He invites me to his booth. It's smaller than I expected, crammed with a rickety chair, an old monitor, a TV, and a pile of fast food wrappers. A half-empty coffee pot sits on the counter, the liquid inside a dark, sludgy brown. Bradley pours me a cup, apologizing for the taste. I take a sip, grimacing slightly but thanking him anyway. He grins, scratching the back of his neck. "It's not fancy," he says, "but it keeps me awake." I glance at the clock on the wall. It's past midnight. "Do you work this late every night?" "Pretty much," he says, leaning back in his chair. "Pays better than the day shift. Plus, I don't have to deal with people yelling at me about ticket prices." I laugh softly, setting the cup down. "It must get lonely, though." He shrugs, his expression darkening for just a moment. "Yeah, well, you get used to it." I start visiting him after that. Not every night, just often enough that he notices. At first, I bring excuses. My car won't start. I need directions. I locked my keys inside. He laughs, joking that I must have the worst luck in the city. But then I stop needing excuses. He starts waiting for me, leaning against the booth's counter when I arrive, his face lighting up in a way that's almost sweet. Almost. We talk for hours sometimes. He tells me about his ex-wife, about the custody battle that drained his savings and left him with a restraining order. He doesn't tell me why she left, but I already know. Men like Bradley always have tells. The way his voice tightens when he talks about his daughter, the way his knuckles whiten when he grips his coffee mug. He's not as careful as he thinks he is. Bradley starts testing boundaries. At first it's casual, an extra long touch when he hands me my coffee, a joke about how I'm his favorite customer. But soon, he leans in too close when we talk, his gaze lingering just a little too long. One night, as I reach for my bag, his hand brushes mine. I pull back, but he doesn't. Instead, his fingers dart out, catching my wrist, and he pulls me toward him. "You shouldn't be out so late," he says, his voice low and heavy. "It's not safe." I let out a soft, uneasy laugh and shift my weight, taking a step back. The movement is subtle, almost casual, but his grip tightens. "I really have to go," I say, keeping my tone light, almost apologetic. His hand tightens further, his nails digging slightly into my skin. "We're not done yet, little girl," he mutters, the words dripping with a mix of authority and something darker. My stomach twists, but I keep my composure. "I'm on my period," I blurt, my voice calm and matter-of-fact. The change is instant. His expression twists with disgust, and he jerks his hand away as if burned. "Fine, go," he snaps, stepping back, his tone sharp and dismissive. I smooth my wrist and gather my things, nodding politely as though nothing had happened. "I'll see you tomorrow," I say, pretending not to notice the way his eyes follow me as I leave. The first time he sees the figure, he doesn't mention it. We're sitting in the booth, the TV playing some late-night infomercial in the background, when his gaze shifts toward the window. "Did you see that?" he asks, his voice low. I turn, frowning. "See what?" He shakes his head, muttering something about headlights reflecting off the glass. But I catch the way his hands tremble as he pours himself another cup of coffee. The second time, he's alone. He doesn't tell me about it until days later, his voice shaky as he describes a shadow moving between the cars, too tall and too fast to be human. "You probably just imagined it," I say, tilting my head. "You've been working so late lately." He nods, but I can tell he isn't listening. The paranoia sets in slowly, like a crack spreading through glass. He starts locking the booth's door, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. He checks the security cameras obsessively, rewinding footage over and over until his eyes are bloodshot. When I visit, he barely looks at me. "I'm here," I whisper one night, resting a hand lightly on his arm. He flinches, his eyes fixed on the empty parking lot. "I'm busy today," he mutters, his voice flat and distant. I pause for a moment, then quietly step back. "All right," I say softly, and I leave him to his silence. The next day I find him sitting in the booth, his eyes wild and sunken, his hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly that his nails are bleeding. "Little girl," he whispers, his voice cracking like dry paper. "It's been watching me." I stand across from him, my hands resting lightly on my hips, head tilted just enough to suggest curiosity. He looks up at me then, and for the first time I see it, real fear. Not suspicion, not unease. Raw, primal fear. His eyes glisten, wide and unblinking, and his lips tremble as if forming the word might break him. "You," he breathes. For a moment, silence stretches between us, thick and suffocating. I lean in slightly, close enough that he has to shift back in his chair, like a cornered animal realizing too late it has nowhere to run. They find him 3 days later. The report is tidy, clinical. His car crumpled against the concrete barrier at the edge of the lot. An accident, they say. A mistake. But the officers whisper to each other, their voices hushed, about the condition of the body. The way his hands were still clenched at 10 and 2, the whites of his knuckles glowing even in death. The way his mouth hung open, frozen mid-scream. At first they think it was the crash, the impact, but the coroner disagrees. He died before the car hit the wall. Heart failure, they say. Too much stress. A system pushed too far. But I know better. I remember the way his voice cracked that night, the way his shoulders curled inward like he was bracing against something no one else could see. I remember the way he whispered my name, not in anger, not in desperation, but in surrender. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to spill blood to leave its mark. Sometimes it's a shadow slipping into your mind, silent and patient, waiting to take root. And when it does, there's no escaping it. Not for Bradley, not for the next one, and certainly not for you. Sometimes it's just a whisper. And I have so many whispers left to give.